With Christmas right around the corner, it is time for me to build some Christmas movies in LEGO. Now I'm only going to pick 3 movies, and the first movie I'm going to pick is Santa Claus is Coming to Town. Now out of everything that happens in that movie, I want to build Santa's workshop. The only problem with that is if you look at it, it's kind of dark and gray. It's not very Christmas-like, it's more dark and sad. So I'm definitely going to change mine up, and it's going to be more Christmassy and stuff. So I started off with this L-shaped base, and I normally always do a rectangle base or a square base. So I decided that for this one I was going to change it up and do an L-shaped one. So I got the outline of the walls and I started to put the windows up, and then I also put the door in and found out how I wanted that to look. And I also gave it some gold door handles. And then I found out where I was going to put everything, and I started to build the walls up some more. I also put these nice golden things above the windows. And then over on the right I have some wrapping paper sticking out of the wall. Now I added all the fun little details on the inside and the outside of the build, but I'll go into all that at the end. And then I finished building up the walls and I tiled them off. And I also added a few more things on the walls. Now the next thing I did was find out where everything was going to go, and then I tiled off the floors. And this took so long it's not even funny. First off, I didn't even have enough tile. I had to go steal it off of this Avenger set to finish it off, so that set is in pieces right now. And then just finding out where I was going to put everything took a lot longer than I thought it would take. But after that it was time to design everything that was going to go in the build. So I made some tables, some stacks of presents, a conveyor belt, and just everything that was going to go in the build. And then I grabbed all the figures, which included Santa Claus and the 4 elves. Now obviously in the movie they're not yellow, and the only reason why I didn't change their skin tones is because the elves' ears are attached to their hats. So if I would have gave them flesh tone faces, they would have all had yellow ears. So I just left all of their yellow heads, and I don't think it's that big of a deal. But now I figured for this video I would put everything on all at once. So instead of doing the builds and then the figures, I'm just going to put everything on at once. So here's the build completed. So there is a lot to go through for this build, but I'm going to start off at the entrance. So you obviously have the doors and the windows, and then you have a sign pointing to the North Pole and a sign pointing to the workshop. And the workshop sign is pointing directly at the door because this is the workshop. But if you go into the workshop, you can see how the elves make their toys. And I gave them a cool little system, which I'll explain in a minute. But first I want to look at the stuff on the walls. So first by the door you have a picture of Santa Claus and all the elves. And if you move down to Santa Claus, there's a picture of a rocket and a calendar. And then you have Santa Claus sitting in his chair reading letters. And now we're going to look at what all 4 elves are doing. So first you have an elf at one large table making toy cars. And above the table you can see his tools. And next to it there's also a drawer. And now if you move to the next elf, he's carrying a toy to the conveyor belt. And I made the conveyor belt white and red because I thought it would be more Christmassy. And now if you look behind the conveyor belt, you can see a computer that says Nice List. And below it are 4 crates. All of those crates are filled with letters for Santa, as you can see by the ones on the floor near his feet. And also next to Santa's chair is a table with some milk and cookies. Now if you go back to the conveyor belt, you can see that there's a rocket ship, a bunny, and a teddy bear. And if you move down the conveyor belt, you can see a crate that catches the toys. And next to that is the 3rd elf. He wraps the presents, as you can see by the one that is on the table. And he also has some scissors and blueprints hanging up on the wall. And then behind him are also some more presents, and there's a little machine that shoots presents over, which I will explain later. And then there's a crate that catches the presents, and then next to that is an elf that stacks the presents. And if you look, there are 2 stacks of presents which are waiting to be put on the sleigh. Now I'm going to explain the elf system. So for this build, because of the L shape that I did, I have more room than normal. So I wanted to try and make an elf system that filled up the space. So first you have the elf that builds the toys. Then one elf carries the toy over and puts it on the conveyor belt. Then the conveyor belt brings the toy down for the other elf to wrap it. After he wraps it, he sticks it on the machine and then pulls the lever, and that lever sends the present back across the workshop. It lands in the box, and then the last elf picks it up and stacks it. And that is the little elf system. But now the build for Santa Claus is Coming to Town is complete. On to the next movie. Now for my next movie, I wanted to do one of my favorite Christmas movies, which is the Santa Claus. It's not most people's favorite, but I want to do it. And I was going to do some kind of like Santa's workshop, but I just did that. So for this movie, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I was going to do the scene where Scott Calvin becomes Santa Claus. Or I guess that's when he kills Santa Claus, isn't it? Well, I'm still gonna do it. So I started off with this base, and I put down the foundation for his house. By the way, I'm not doing his entire house, I'm just doing the side where he falls off the roof. And also his house is kind of weird, and also it's red, and I did not have enough red to do it, or at least I don't have enough dark red. So I'm just gonna do brown because it looks kind of brown in some of the scenes anyway. So I started to build up the walls, and I had the porch and the steps. And then I put some railing on the steps, and I actually really like how they look. After that, I finished off the walls, I added a door and some windows and a doorknob. And then I built up the 2nd floor, and I'm not gonna be doing an interior for this build, I'm just doing the outside. And I think the window placement on the 2nd floor is kind of weird, but it's how it looked in the movie. Like I said, it's a very weird house. But then I built the sidewalk for the build, and after that I put all the snow on the build, and I also put a leg piece to attach to Santa because that's where he's gonna lay. After that I built up the sides for the roof, and building this up was terrible. If you look at the sides, those are not bricks. I ran out of brown bricks, so I had to build the rest of the thing up with plates. But then I ran out of plates, so that top part on each side is jumper plates, which makes it very unstable. The top of that roof is like the most unstable thing I've ever built. I could flick it and it would fly off. roof. But either way, I got it done. And also, I'm only doing half of the roof, which is why it does not go down. It just goes up and then goes flat. Then I built up the actual roof, and most of it is covered in snow, but not the whole thing. And I also have some snow hanging off the edges. But then if you stick it on the build, it just kind of rests on there. As you can see from the back of the roof, it doesn't really clip to it, it just kind of rests. But now that the build was almost complete, it was time to grab the figures. So I made a Scott Calvin and a Charlie, and then I grabbed my Santa Claus, but he doesn't have a head, because in the movie he disappears and you can't see his face. So I just put a clear stud on the hat and stuck it to the body. And then I stuck all the figures on the build. So you have Charlie and Scott Calvin looking at Santa Claus, and then you have Santa Claus on the floor. Now there is still something I have to add to this build before it is complete. If you look on the left, there's a 2x2 plate that has nothing on it, and I saved that for this. I got these nice light up lampposts that I want to add on the build. This is the first time I've ever used them, but I'm going to try them out. So I put on the build and I ran the wiring through all the bricks, and then I plugged it in, and this is how it looks. And I think it looks pretty cool, honestly. But with that, the build for the Santa Claus is completed. Now on to the next movie. For the next movie, I wasn't sure what to do. I wanted to do the Grinch, but we don't have a Grinch figure and I couldn't make one. I also wanted to do Elf, but I didn't want to just do a workshop again. And also I didn't want to make him yellow. So even though there's already an entire Lego set on it, I'm gonna make a build for Home Alone. Now I think it's pretty hard to beat that set. That set is really good and I would love to own it one day. But for now I'm gonna try and make my own trash version of it, or at least a part of the house. So I started off with this base, and I started to build up the staircase to the basement. So the reason why I'm doing the back of the house with the staircase to the basement is because I want to have both of the robbers in the build, and one of the few times that they're actually together when trying to rob the house is when they're near the main staircase. But I didn't want to build that because this guy on YouTube already built it, so I wanted to do my own build based on a different part in the movie. So I'm doing the part where one robber falls down the stairs and the other one gets his hat burned. Now they actually happen at 2 different times in the movie, but I'm just gonna make it where they happen at the exact same time. So after I built up the staircase, I built up the gray walls. And I'm not actually making the basement. None of this is gonna be seen, it's all gonna be covered up. I only have these gray walls because the rest of the build has to be built up higher, because these stairs are going down to the basement. So I covered it up and put all the white plates for the snow, and I also put a door down in the basement, and then I put the outline of the walls for the house. And the last thing, which I really don't like how it turned out, is I have some snow seeping off of the edge, and I was trying to make it a cool transition between the gray wall and the snow, but I think it just turned out kind of ugly. And then I made the railing for the staircase and I added a window and a door. And I realized very quickly that I put the staircase way too far away from the door. If you look at it in the movie, it's right next to the door, and I put it way too far away. My proportions are completely off, but I'm just gonna roll with it. And next I finished off the walls and I tiled it off, and then on the outside next to the door I added this little lantern, and then I made the interior, which is an abomination. I absolutely hate how this interior turned out. The sink is sticking out too far. It's way too much brown. It's accurate to the color in the movie, but the thing about the movie is they have white walls on the inside, or white wallpaper, and for the Lego version I just have brown on brown. So I think it's just way too much brown, but I'm just gonna continue building. And then I added a cup on the counter, and I also added the fire on the cabinet. Now back on the outside I added 2 plants, a half-built snowman, and a bunch of snow on the floor. But now it's time to make the figures. Now I obviously don't own the official one, so I gotta make my own. So this is my own Kevin, Harry, and Marv. And then I added the figures to the build, and the build was complete. So you have Marv falling down the stairs, and then you have Kevin behind the door holding his BB gun, as Harry is getting his hat burned off. Now out of all 3 builds, this is definitely the worst one. I do not like it at all. The proportions are really off. The colors aren't right. I just don't like it. So now after that, I have built Santa Claus is Coming to Town, the Santa Claus, and Home Alone in Lego.